On This Week in Enterprise Tech, Facebook is selling your two-factor auth phone numbers to advertisers. The FCC is capping the fees for wireless providers, and local governments are not having it. And Curtis, Heather, and I talk with Brian Cohen from Oracle about container management, open source, and cloud-native computing. Twiat on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Twiat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 310, recorded September 28th, 2018. Oracle's Cloud Developer Relations. This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by JW Player, the most powerful and flexible video platform enabling businesses, including Twit TV, to customize the video experience on their website. To learn more and get 50% off your business subscription, visit jwplayer.com/twit and use code TWIT at checkout. And by Grammarly, the communication tool that helps improve your writing for every occasion. Start writing more confidently for work, school, and even on the go. It's a great way to double-check your important papers, documents, and even avoid future typos. Get 20% off Grammarly Premium today at grammarly.com/enterprise. And by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans, introducing Rate Shield approval. If you're in the market to buy a home, Rate Shield approval locks up your rate for up to 90 days while you shop. It's a real game changer. Learn more and get started at rocketmortgage.com/enterprise. Welcome to Twiat, This Week in Enterprise Tech, the show that is dedicated to you, the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how this world's connected. I'm your host, Louis Moreski, your guide through this big world of enterprise, but I definitely can't guide you through this big world alone. I need some help from some of the top enterprise tech professionals in the industry, starting with Heather Moe Williams, Senior Product Solutions Architect from Ruckus Networks. Welcome back, Heather.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me back. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So what have you been up to these past couple of weeks? We haven't seen you in a while.
Well, actually, I'm getting ready to. I've been keeping an eye on, Hurricane Florence. So I'm getting ready to head over to North Carolina to help out the ITDRC guys, get some comms set up. I'll be part of Wave 2. But more exciting, or as exciting for me, out here in the challenged zeros and ones land, I have a new WISP, and the tower will be installed next week. I am guaranteed 25 down and 15 up. With a 30 millisecond delay. I know. And you got to know that that's pretty exciting for me out here.
Well, at least I hope that doesn't alter. Nice, Kevin. I really hope that doesn't actually alter the amount of snark that we're going to get later about the FCC stuff. So hopefully that stays static.
Oh, I'll have something to say about that no matter what.
All right. Fantastic. Well, we not only have one, but two enterprise tech leaders as co-hosts today. Mr. Curtis Franklin is also joining us, senior editor at Dark Reading. Welcome back, Curtis.
It is great to be here. Great to be back in the office after spending a week at the Orange County Convention Center with some people from, this small company out in Redmond. It was great getting down to Microsoft Ignite. Lots of interesting stuff, and actually met some fascinating people while I was there, including one person with notably great hair.
Well, I did have a chance to visit Curtis while I was down there in Orlando. You were quite busy. You were covering all things security and IoT. Any quick key takeaways from the Ignite event?
Well, I think one of the things that I wrote about and that was really exciting was what's going on with Azure Sphere. This is really an interesting thing. Microsoft's answer to the question, how do we protect the Internet of Things? The part that really seemed exciting to me is the fact that they're working with the chip manufacturers to have unique authentication keys inside each microprocessor. So that you can have genuine authentication before the devices leave the factory and without having to have any user interaction. Those are available in development kits now And I'm supposed to be getting my hands on one pretty soon. So with any luck at all, we'll have something to talk about here on Twiat before too long.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to it. Well, we're talking a little bit about security today, as well as plus we're going to talk about and chat about the FCC's recent proposals to stop local governments from using non-standardized charges against cell deployments. Plus, we have a guest to talk container management, open source, and cloud native computing. But first, like we always do, let's jump into the blips. Now, Facebook is back in the news again about privacy, but this time they might be using your data for advertising. Oh, wait, that's normal for them. Well, this one is a spin on security. Do you use two-factor authentication to log into Facebook? Well, if you do, you know that you have to give them a valid phone number so they can either call you with a code or send you a text message. Well, it's actually a pain to set up sometimes because they don't allow VoIP numbers. Well, what if I told you that this data is also being sent along with your email addresses to advertisers? Yep, it's a kind of feels like the catch-22 here. You use a phone number to increase the security of your account, only to find out that it's being handed off to advertisers as well. Now, Facebook is not content to use just your contact information that you're willing to put in your Facebook profile to advertisers. It also is using contact information you handed over for security purposes and contact information you didn't hand over at all, but that was collected from other people's contact books. This hidden layer of details Facebook collects is coined shadow contact information. Now, shadow profile data can't be removed because it isn't visible to you. Just like aggregator sites collect your internet footprint of information, so does Facebook, and that information is used to target ads. Now, as a test, researchers from Northeastern University uploaded a list of landline numbers, which was not linked to their experimental account, and added a different contact list on each device that were accessible to Facebook for finding friends. Now, after uploading, they found that these numbers were then being used to target ads, and when they ran a special ad campaign themselves, these ads turned up in the Facebook news feeds for the accounts they created. Now, although Facebook had no comment about the ordeal, this essentially means you really have no control about how much information they collect on you if other people are giving it to them. Now, just another reason to use the catch-all email accounts and VoIP numbers, even for friends and family, because most people aren't aware. You just can't trust technology these days.
Speaking of not trusting technology, there's a flaw in Apple's tool for enrolling fleets in MDM. Researchers at Duo Labs have discovered a security flaw in the authentication process of the Apple Device Enrollment Program, or DEP, which is an Apple service that helps enterprises enroll iOS, macOS, and tvOS devices in mobile device management systems, or MDM. The problem is centered around the authentication required or not required, as it turns out, for those enrolled devices. Now, it's important to note that what they found is a flaw and not a bug. According to the researchers, anyone can send a valid Apple serial number to the server and retrieve the DEP profile, which can include information like authentication keys and Wi-Fi information. The real problem, they say, is that the serial number space is small enough to be vulnerable to brute forcing, where you just generate a sequence of potential serial numbers, submit them rapidly, and wait until you get valid responses. The issue comes about because the serial number alone is not sufficient for secure authentication. As of this time, Apple hasn't commented. Since it's an issue with an Apple service rather than an application, it's entirely possible they'll fix it and never say a word to previous users.
And continuing today's theme on bashing the big guys, we have a tarnish on the Chrome. A few weeks ago, Google rolled out Chrome 69, and that included a change that had a number of users spitting mad. In previous versions, Sync allowed users to log in with their Google accounts inside Chrome and optionally upload and synchronize local browser data, which includes history, passwords, bookmarks, etc., to Google's servers. The unadvertised change in Chrome 69 is an auto login mechanism where Chrome takes the user's identity, Google identity, and then logs the user into Sync whenever a Chrome user accesses a Google-owned site. This means that when a user signs into Chrome, they're automatically signed into Google websites with that account. Or when a user isn't signed into Chrome but logged into a Google site, they're automatically signed into Chrome. The concern is that this allows Google to link that person's traffic to a specific browser and a device with a higher degree of accuracy. The real problem, according to Matthew Green, a Johns Hopkins professor and cryptography expert, and by the way, a Twitter account worth following, is the change in the interface that obfuscates when a user is logged in or not, and when to click on to force a sync or not. This is referred to as a dark UI pattern. Google has already responded with an announcement that Chrome 70, due out in mid-October, will add a control to allow users to restore the separation of the Chrome and Google account logins, as well as updating Chrome's interface to make it clearer when its sync service is enabled. Well, there you have it, a spit polish for Chrome.
Now, as if we didn't cover enough security today, security researcher firm ESET discovered some pretty awful and powerful malware that can actually survive reformatting and repaving your machine and OS. Now, those big box stores are going to have to find another way to gouge money from you rather than just reinstalling Windows or Mac OS or replacing the hard drives. It's dubbed LoJax and originating from the hacker group known as Fancy Bear. Now, this attack targets the computer's UEFI, or Unified Extensible Firmware Interface. The malware essentially rewrites the UEFI so the malware can persist inside the computer's flash memory, allowing it to survive even when the OS is reinstalled or even when your hard disks are replaced. Now, the only way to get rid of it is to flash your memory that houses the UEFI. Now, ESET said LoJax behavior mimics a legitimate software tool called LoJack, an anti-theft product that also is hard to remove from the PC. Now, since this software's intent is to protect the system from theft, it's important that it resists OS reinstallation or hard drive replacement. Thus, it's implemented as a UEFI or BIOS module able to survive such events. Now, this is just a weaponized version of it. It isn't clear how this malware was delivered, but the good news is that you can block LoJack's attack through a PC industry feature called Secure Boot. Now, this will actually check to see if all of your PC parts, including the firmware, are authenticated with valid code signing certificates from manufacturers. Now all I have to do is educate grandma on how to get this enabled in the BIOS, and either that or at least I have job security as being the IT people of the family, just in case you needed more of a reason to be one. Thanks, Fancy Bear.
Hey, just when you thought it was safe to use Linux, our flaw in software theme continues this week, because multiple Linux distributions, including all current versions of Red Hat Enterprise Linux and CentOS, contain a newly discovered bug that gives attackers a way to obtain full root access on vulnerable systems. Researchers from security vendor Qualys discovered the integer overflow flaw, which exists in a critical Linux kernel function for memory management and allows attackers with unprivileged local access to a system to escalate those privileges. Now, the researchers have developed a proof of concept exploit, though one has not yet been seen in the wild. The good news is a patch for the flaw, which Qualys has dubbed Mutagen Astronomy, is available, and most Linux distributions have already backported the patch for older versions of their kernels. But Red Hat Linux Enterprise, CentOS, and Debian 8, or the old stable version, are not yet patched. And just in case you thought security researchers had lost their group sense of humor, the name Mutagen Astronomy is an anagram of too many arguments, which is the fundamental vulnerability being exploited here.
Now for some good news. Forget spray-on tans, we have antennas. The joke in networking used to be that the RJ45 adapter was a limiting factor for device dimensions. With more and more devices using wireless connectivity, antennas have become one of the new limiting factors, and with the development of the Internet of Things, the demand for thin but efficient electronics is only increasing. Now, researchers at Drexel University have developed an antenna that can be sprayed onto just about any surface. It's a form of titanium carbide, and it's a thin metallic material known as MaxEne. It's highly conductive and has been used in the past in experimental batteries that can recharge very quickly. The team at Drexel has created a water-soluble powder that can form an ink or paint capable of transmitting and directing radio waves. The team has been looking to create 2D nanomaterials that are just a few atoms across. The new MaxEne antennas are not just as thin as 62 nanometers. That's 1,000 times thinner than a sheet of paper and almost transparent. They outperform other available nanomaterial antennas like graphene and silver ink by 50 to 300 times respectively. At just 8 micrometers, Maxine achieves a reflection coefficient of negative 65 dB, and a 1 micrometer thick Maxine RFID tag was able to reach a reading distance of 8 meters at 860 megahertz. And unlike other materials, which are fabrication intensive, Maxine is a single-step airbrush spray process. Apparently, you really never can be too thin.
Well, instead of kick me signs going forward, to be sprayed with antennas. Now, the RDP or remote desktop protocol is a super useful service and protocol to allow for remote control and access of your desktop over that normal port of 3389. Well, unless secured well, this can also be targeted for hackers. Well, this past week in a public service announcement from the FBI, they're warning companies about the dangers of leaving the endpoint exposed online and not being secured. According to the FBI, the use of RDP actually has gone up steadily since mid-2016 because of its usefulness. Now, over the past 3 years, there have been tens of ransomware families that were specifically designed to be deployed inside a network after attackers gained an initial foothold, which in many cases ended up being an RDP server. Now, ransomware specifically designed to be deployed via RDP includes strains such as Krypton, LockCrypt, Scarabee, Horksuki, and many more. Now, the easiest way for a hacker to exploit this is to connect to an RDP-enabled machine with an admin account that actually doesn't have a password set up. The next method is using a brute force attack on a username and password. And the third method is using software that mass scans the internet for machines with the open protocol and weak credentials that can be guessed. Now, there is actually a site out there that tracks machines with open RDP protocols called XDeadGick, which is actually a RDP server pool list. Now, what does the FBI and Homeland have to say about this? Well, they suggest you audit your network and disable services like these if you don't use it. Use a different port than that default 3389, and of course, enable strong passwords and turn on account policies. Plus, you might as well try and use two-factor auth as well. Now, constantly log and audit your network because, of course, you're going to find that that'll actually show any breaches or any issues. And if nothing else, it's the tried and true rule that if you don't use it, shut it off. That will ultimately save your headaches later. But this might just be another reason enabling two-factor auth is a good idea for all your services and protocols. Well, folks, that does it for the blips. Next up, the bites. But first, we have to thank a really great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is JW Player. Now, everyone watches videos online, and when it works really well, you really don't notice which video player you're using. Well, if you look really close, you'll notice that it's most likely JW Player. Now, having built tons of front ends in my day, I can tell you that JW Player is one of the most flexible and feature-rich HTML video platforms out there. Now, it's easy to integrate. If it's time to grow up from YouTube, JW Player has it covered. The spectrum goes from that casual YouTuber all the way up to the large-scale publishers and broadcasters who want to maximize video ad fill rates and CPMs. Now, if you have visited the Twit website, you probably noticed that when you watch an episode on the site, it uses JW Player. Now, as Leo says, it is one of the most important features of the Twit website. With quick access to any show right on the site is critical for Twit's business, and JW Player gets out of the way and lets Twit shine. Now, Twit is not the only one using this awesome player. Top websites and publishers like the Washington Post, Business Insider, and Vice all are able to customize JW Player for their needs. Plus, JW Player was able to be integrated into their brands and seamlessly integrated into their website design as well. Now, if you're ready to take control of your video experiences, here's what JW Player can bring to the table. Gives you buffer-free technology, which makes it one of the fastest players on the net today. A fully customizable player to match your brand. Now, of course, the video CMS is to manage your uploads and videos. Plus, they offer APIs to help you enhance the experience and integrate it into your site's functionality. If you're running ads, this player will help you max out your fill rates and CPMs as well. Now, to me, if you're serious about offering content, JW Player is the way to go. Visit jwplayer.com/twit and use code TWIT at checkout to get 50% off your business subscription. This is a limited time exclusive offer for twit.tv listeners, so be sure to check it out today. That's jwplayer.com/twit and use code TWIT at checkout. Well, folks, it's time for the bites. Now, this one's pretty interesting. In the past, local governments would work with wireless carriers to make deals on what it would cost for carriers to actually deploy and maintain wireless installations in their areas. Now, this meant that there was no standardized costs for the carriers, and local governments could make sure that the deal also included costs to maintain the network as well. Now, while this past couple months, the FCC's been working on a new plan and hopes it will stimulate new deployments, especially in areas that haven't had a chance to have wireless yet. Now, the plan is to standardize the fees to the deployments of new wireless. Now, FCC's reasoning is to encourage the installation of small cell units for 5G adoption. The interesting part here is even though they hope it will stimulate coverage increase, it doesn't actually call any requirements for carriers to build in areas where they don't have infrastructure or wireless as well today. Now, the FCC plan proposes upfront application fees of only $100 for each small cell deployment, and usually the size of the suitcase is the size of the 5G deployment, and add annual FETA fees of up to $270 per small tower. Now, this is interesting because it does limit the local governments that how much they may charge for placing 5G deployments, even on cells, on small poles or traffic lights or any other place. Heather, I want to start with you because I think this is quite relevant to your area. Will this spark the increase of network installation, especially in areas that don't have it yet?
Well, given that there's no requirement that the cell carriers actually do anything that they weren't going to do already, all we've done is rewarded them for doing what they wanted to do, and now they're just saying you don't have to pay. So the local community isn't gathering any, isn't getting reimbursed for the fair use of their property, and there's nothing that says this is going to spark anything.
Right. Well, Curtis, which way will this go? I mean, will carriers just take the extra capital and reinvest it somewhere else, or will they maybe like marketing or something, or do you think they'll actually take it and start moving it to new infrastructure?
Oh, I think the likelihood is great that the carriers will take the extra funds and return them as profits to their shareholders. That's kind of what they've done with most of the tax benefits that we've seen given to companies this year. So I have no reason to believe they'll do anything else with this money that they don't have to spend. There are a lot of issues with this proposal, and among them is the fact that it values real estate the same regardless of where in the nation it is. It's saying that real estate on a pole in Manhattan is worth exactly what real estate is worth on a pole in a town of 5,000 in Idaho. And I think that's a fairly ridiculous proposal. But it is entirely in keeping with the business and government philosophy of the current administration. So I don't know why anyone would be surprised by the proposal.
Right. Now, Heather, do you think this will actually cut the hands off of the local governments to make sure that their needs are met? Because I think a lot of them are saying, hey, the costs of these deployments are not just the installations, it's also to maintain them. It's also to make sure if things happen to them later on, if they're just kind of sore-eye things, we need to cover them up, that kind of thing. So we need to have kind of continual cost or COGS to basically maintain them. Is this just another way to prevent them from having to gouge the carriers for that?
Yeah, and first of all, I don't really think that there's a gouge going on for the price that's that has been negotiated. But I'd also like to add that I don't think you needed me today for the snark. I think Kurt brought it. I'm over here applauding it. What he said. But no, I think that the other thing is that we got to think about when it comes to these rural communities, there's not a lot of revenue generation, and they're taking this. This is an excellent source of revenue that you, like you said, there's upkeep and there's maintenance. On the other hand, I'd say there's not going to be a lot of upkeep or maintenance to be done because I don't think the rural areas are going to be seeing a lot of investment from these carriers. So there's not going to be a whole lot to keep up. I think that Kurt's exactly right. They're going to take this money and put it into something that's going to benefit them better. I would have loved to have seen some kind of something, a codicil or something in the paperwork that would have said, in exchange for this, you need to do your due diligence and actually be a service provider. And that means for including the 39% of rural America that doesn't have service.
Absolutely. So I think that brings up an interesting topic, because I think there was a call out here from Blair Levin, who used to be the previous FCC chair back in '93. He acknowledged that he said that, hey, carriers actually have acknowledged this themselves, that they didn't really have issues. Like, they made good deals with local governments. They made deals that would work. And it wasn't really any obstacles to creating deployment. So, Kurt, I guess I want to throw it to you and just get your point of view here. What do you think the motivation behind this is then? If they're saying, if the carriers at one point have, obviously said, hey, this we're doing fine, we're working it out, and the local governments are happy because they basically strike a deal that works for them as well, then why put these restrictions on it? I mean, obviously they say, hey, it's going to save the industry $2 billion. Let's hope that gets put back into infrastructure, but that can't be the only reason, right?
Why no? I think if you want to look at motivation, all you have to do is look at the lobbying budget of the major wireless carriers, see just how many lobbyists they keep busy in Washington, D.C., and somewhere in the intersection of number of lobbyists and number of dollars, you'll find the motivation. I will say that I find it fascinating that part of the governing principle that the current administration espouses is federalism, where you basically try to get the control of government action as close to the voter as possible, except when doing so might cost a major company extra dollars. In that case, it's vital for the federal government to step in and reduce that impact to the corporation as much as possible. Now, you can tell my philosophy is different. I think that this is one of those cases where it really does make a great deal of sense to have control of things like the pricing for government property, for publicly owned property, fairly close to the public entity that owns that property. So I don't know that this is something that the government has cried for in a great deal. If the carriers have been crying for it, they haven't been doing it very publicly. And so this really is a gift to the carriers and, more importantly, their shareholders, at the expense of local governments, many of whom are trying to find the resources to provide services to their citizens every place possible. If they can't get it from the carriers here, my suspicion is that we will see more things like, speeding tickets.
Right. All right, Heather, I want to throw it back to you for kind of almost the last thought here, because we have to move on. But I think the question to you is, you kind of brought it up, hey, maybe put in some stipulations in this new rule, these new set of rules, to kind of maybe say, hey, you also have to put some money into infrastructure in areas that don't have it. Let's be a little creative here. What do you think some of the other ways would be to get some of these carriers to kind of move into these areas, these rural areas, and these areas that don't have coverage?
Wow, you need somebody smarter than me to come up with a creative way to do it. But let's go back to the model that we have with the news broadcast. We gave airwaves to TV stations, and in exchange for being able to print their own money 23 hours out of the day, 1 hour out of the day, they were supposed to do a service to the public and produce broadcast news. We all know that went the way of commercialism. But there's got to be a trade-off with, in exchange for operating and saying, I'm buying a spectrum, so I own this, for instance, in the case of a cellular provider. You get to own it for this area. Well, then doggone it, use it. If you own these airwaves, then make sure that it's occupied with your signal and that it's usable by people, or give it back.
Right, absolutely. Now, one last thing, I want to throw back over to Kurt, because I think Emily Estrange brings up an interesting point, and she wants to see what you have to say about it. Now, she said, Curtis, what do you think of the EFF? Why is it okay for them to actually have access to lobbying the government just because they do some things that we support?
Oh, and I just was typing to Emily Lestrange. I'm not saying that the carriers shouldn't have lobbyists. I'm just saying that if you're looking for an explanation of why this particular proposal was put forth, that's where I would look. It's not one that makes sense from the federal government perspective because it doesn't really provide any benefit to the federal government or to the nation as a whole unless you define benefit to shareholders as benefiting the nation as a whole. It's one of those things where I just have trouble for this particular thing finding a rationale that I don't get cynical about. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be lobbyists. I think that any individual, any organization has the constitutional right to petition government, whether it be lawmakers or the executive branch. That's in the Constitution. I'm all for it. But while anyone has the right to petition government, government doesn't have the obligation to always say yes. And so I think that this is a case where there could have been more nuanced ways of looking at this. And it's a shame that nuance is something that seems to be lacking at the FCC these days.
Indeed it is. Well, folks, that does it for the bites. Next up, it's my favorite part of This Week in Enterprise Tech when we get to bring a guest in to drop some knowledge on the Twilight Riot. But first, we have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Grammarly. Now, there is always that one amazing and cool tool that helps you so much that you just keep coming back over and over again. And for me, when I write, it's Grammarly. Now, not only does it help me write better content, but it also helps me with writing better emails too. Now, Grammarly will help you correct your writing skills by helping with grammar, phrases, and sentences. Even the free version helps with spelling, grammar, and it can literally make your writing better. Now, the Grammarly Premium adds some pretty great features as well. Grammarly Premium helps you with advanced punctuation, structure, style within context, vocabulary suggestions, conciseness, and readability for different occasions. Now, for me, it really is more enjoyable. I trust that I won't send bad content anymore because I can lean on Grammarly. Now, it integrates with Microsoft Word and Outlook, and they have extensions in all the major browsers from Chrome, Edge, Safari, Firefox. Of course, they also have a desktop app. Now, if you travel a lot and you use public transportation for your work and you work on your phone for everything, well, Grammarly has you covered as well. It now works with iOS and Android as well. Now, for me on iOS, Grammarly Keyboard is a lifesaver because autocomplete can sometimes fail you. Everyone's done it. Look at all those funny posts we can see out there from people with autocomplete failures. Well, with Grammarly Keyboard, it can keep you safe and make you a better writer. And it just looks better when you write with Grammarly. Now, if you haven't tried Grammarly yet, go get it. It will literally make your writing and your life better. Now, go to Grammarly.com/Enterprise to get 20% off Grammarly Premium today. That is Grammarly.com/Enterprise. And we thank Grammarly for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's now my favorite part of the show where we get to bring a guest in to drop some knowledge on the Twilight Riot. And today we have Bob Quillen, VP of Oracle's Cloud Developer Relations, focused on container native applications. Welcome back. Actually, welcome to the show, Bob. We haven't had you on yet, but we definitely are interested in talking about container native applications. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, of course, we want to get into containers and open source, but first, you've had quite a ride through the tech industry. Our audience loves to hear a little bit about origin stories. Can you maybe take us on a quick, short journey through your career in tech?
Sure. Yeah, I've done many startups in the Bay Area, and now I'm in Austin for the last about 8 years. But the last 10 years have been pretty crazy. You think about what's been going on with tech and the developer landscape. 10 years ago, I was at a startup called Nlayers. Nlayers was acquired by EMC, and we really focused on the virtualization journey, physical to virtual. Developers back in that time were really focusing on agile technologies. The apps were interior architectures. Virtualization was really where the infrastructure was, and we focused a lot on private cloud. And private cloud was the major theme, and helping customers move from the physical to virtual world. There was a lot of focus around server consolidation, and the developer community was slowly starting to pick up this new set of cultural techniques called DevOps. Around 2010, I joined a startup out here called CopperEgg. CopperEgg really focused on monitoring, doing application performance monitoring, doing DevOps monitoring. DevOps started really opening up the opportunity for developers to automate the CI/CD cycle, how they deploy code. Infrastructure as a code became huge. Things like Puppet and Chef were the tools of the trade, maybe 6-7 years ago, and a major shift to the public cloud took place. And we saw all these application providers and developers really flowing into the public cloud. We were acquired. CopperEgg was acquired in 2013, so there was an acquisition. My co-founders and I started looking at what was next, and suddenly we saw this emergence around 2013, 2014 around containers. Docker was coming into play. They had just moved from Doc Cloud, PaaS services to Docker itself, and begun to sort of pivot into this whole new world around containers. And that really wasn't that long ago. This is around 2014. We started a company called Stack Engine, and really realized that containers were the killer app for DevOps. It's the artifact that helps you move from development through test, through staging out to production. The same artifact can move through that process. So it really tied together DevOps. And so DevOps and containers became kind of this nice 1-2 punch. We saw Docker starting to standardize containers. My company, Stack Engine, started focusing on how do you orchestrate and manage and do container management around our whole application infrastructure. We got acquired by Oracle, ... That was about 3 years ago. And since then, we've seen the CNCF come in, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, really taking Docker into the next level in those containers technologies to Kubernetes, creating a whole kind of platform now for container applications. So you think about DevOps, you think about open source, cloud native, you think about public cloud and that infrastructure. You kind of now this triad of capabilities have been built on top of each other over the last 10 years, really putting all this power into the development community. Super exciting to be part of this new world where we're now harnessing container technology, open source environments, doing this on a high power public cloud, and unleashing creativity across developers. There's so much innovation that's going on right now. So, that's really where we started, and kind of where the world is today. And it's been an amazing run over just for developers in the last 10 years.
Now, I definitely want to go into container app development life cycles and what it takes, and kind of the lay of the land. But I do want to bring up, what is it? That's a great place to stop there, Kevin. If you go back up to that diagram there. Now, can you just give the audience? I know the audience kind of knows a lot about containers, but it seems like it's pretty cluttered here. Like, what does the application stack look like today for kind of container app developers? Can you maybe give the 10,000-foot view of all of this?
Yeah, and I think CNCF, while they put out this landscape as a aid to kind of where things are today, this is also one of the challenges. There was a survey the CNCF just put out in August this last month, 2018, and complexity and training are two of the top issues that people are saying now around cloud native technologies, container technologies. How do we manage and understand all this stuff? CNCF has actually taken a step back, and now they're putting things through a sandbox process, then through a staging process up through graduation, and that helps reduce kind of the search space and helps people understand what's going on in terms of CNCF technologies. I think a lot of what we're also seeing is there's education and training required. DevOps is a cultural change for companies, and you talk to a lot of companies, a lot of leaders in companies. This DevOps culture change is something that's been going on for a while, but it's still something enterprises are going through. You put container technology on top of that, now you have a technical shift. The great news is that standardization that's happening, really driven by Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Kubernetes gives you that orchestration standard that basically all the vendors have agreed to. Now we have an infrastructure standard by which I can build container native applications, orchestrate them, deploy them, and manage them. Standard Kubernetes, Oracle Cloud has one. We're one of the first certified Kubernetes services that were out there last year. But all the public cloud providers and many private cloud providers and software providers, Kubernetes is Kubernetes. It's standard. And it creates opportunity for now companies and enterprises to have choice. And that's kind of the cool thing. You should be able to take a Kubernetes application and run it almost anywhere. And that's the idea of not having lock-in, having choice, and this is the thing that open source can provide you. And really, that's what Oracle heard from customers many years ago, a few years ago, and really it helped drive acquisitions like Stack Engine, where I came from. We had other companies called Iron and Worker and Dyn and ZenEdge and Data Science. All these are new companies that have been brought in into Oracle itself, for example, and these are all open source companies, cloud native companies, et cetera. So education and training is one of the first places to start, going through the CNCF courses, going to the conferences. The other thing that we've done a lot here in Austin itself and been committed to is the local community. And there's lots and lots of meetups that can help you get trained on cloud native technologies. And there's meetups all over the country, all over the world. And there's container meetups, Docker meetups, cloud meetups, Kubernetes meetups. It's a great way to go out and meet your local developer community, your peers, and get trained and learn about stuff. There's lots of stuff available on blogs, on free sources, on through LinkedIn, et cetera, training. So training, education, those are all big issues that we're all trying to address as part of the cloud native complexity that's out there. The one last point I'll make, and we'll get back to some of the Q&A, is a managed service is another great way to help people sort of leapfrog the complexity in cloud native. So if you're trying to make sense of that whole complex cloud native ecosystem, a lot of vendors, a lot of cloud vendors like Oracle Cloud have already built managed services for things like Kubernetes, for things like Docker, for monitoring and observability. So you can now put plugins on top of that are standard for Prometheus, for just monitoring. That's open source. There's logging, there's tracing, there's ways to manage your applications, which are all built on top of Kubernetes. So Kubernetes provides that platform. But a managed service takes the administration and management away from you, and then you focus on building the applications. You never have to learn and get trained in all of how to maintain that yourself. So, so that's kind of the starting point. I think those are some of the ways you can begin to address that complex landscape chart, the ecosystem chart everyone gets scared of, and reduce it down to a certain space and a management space that you can do something about. So.
Right. Now, you kind of touched on this just a little bit, but I think one thing to kind of maybe call out for the audience is, there's a lot of organizations that don't want to get bound to specific cloud stack, like you kind of brought that out, and open source does help this. But do you feel that because open source offers so many options here, it does create kind of some complexity in what's the best for some solutions? How is Oracle maybe helping with that?
Yeah, so typically what you want to have is a curated stack, and using unforked CNCF standard technology components. And I think that's really where Oracle has started. We look at, we hear, don't fork the open source, don't use your own versions of it. I want to have flexibility to be open, community driven. We know that we're not the first cloud provider people look at. There's many cloud providers out there. We assume there's going to be a multi-cloud environment for our customers. Every customer I talk to is already using other cloud providers too. So what you want to do is give choice, and a business choice and a technical choice should be balanced. So open source provides a standard way to approach Kubernetes, and Kubernetes is Kubernetes. Then you can look at the cloud itself. Does it give you the governance, the compliance you need? Does it give you the performance that you need? Does it need to be run locally based upon certain standards and governance in your country or the country standards? Are there governance standards that, in terms of security, in terms of other kinds of PCI or healthcare compliance? So all those things start coming into play of where to choose the proper infrastructure components for your application. And you can do that from using, not just having only one choice, but you want to have multiple choices based upon your business, your needs, cost, the application, the use case, et cetera. So that choice now is becoming more and more available to customers. And that's kind of what the promise of open source is. As long as you can kind of then, you have Cloud Native Computing Foundation, you have industry vendors like ourselves, you have users coming in, companies contributing to that, all those creating a community where there's now some standards and ways to sort of lead, create a garden path through all that complexity that's out there. And managed services provide a good basis for that in terms of giving you a starting point to get you kind of to that next level without having to learn all this stuff yourself.
Right, makes sense. So when we come back, I do want to talk a little bit about those managed services, maybe even some of the serverless stuff that you guys are offering. And of course, I want to bring my co-host back in. But before we do, I want to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Now, home buying is not easy by any means. It's actually quite stressful. And I remember buying my last home. It was not fun. I had to deal with multiple banks, constant communication with different reps. I had to search around my house and my businesses for the filing information, as well as I had to worry about interest rate hikes. Now, it's nerve-wracking, and it seems really to take forever. Now, the market today is unpredictable, which means interest rates are changing all the time, and it causes a lot of anxiety. Well, our friends at Quicken Loans and Rocket Mortgage noticed all the pitfalls with the process and are doing something about it. Now, they're calling it the power buying process. Now, here's how it works. Quicken Loans will verify your income, assets, credit in less than 24 hours to give you a verified approval. What is that? Well, this gives you the strength of a cash buyer. Now, in a current market, that is a massively huge advantage as a buyer, because sometimes you literally have to put an offer in at a moment's notice right at an open house. Now, once you're verified, you qualify for their all-new exclusive Rate Shield approval. Now, first, they'll lock up your rate for up to 90 days while you shop. Now, here's the best part. If the rates go up, your rate stays the same. And if the rate goes down, your rate also drops. Now, if you ask me, as a home buyer, this seems to kind of give you the upper hand, because either way, you can always win. Now, if this is basically the kind of thing you kind of expect from the America's largest mortgage lender. If you're thinking about buying a house, go out right now to rocketmortgage.com/enterprise. In just less than 10 minutes, your info could be entered and you're on your way to home buying freedom. Love Rocket Mortgage. Now, to get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/enterprise. Rate Shield approval is only valid on certain 30-year purchase transactions. Additional conditions or exclusions may apply based on Quicken Loans data in comparison to public data records. Equal housing lender license in all 50 states, NMLS, consumeraccess.org, number 3030. That's rocketmortgage.com/enterprise. And we thank Rocket Mortgage for their support in This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, we're talking with Bob Quillen, VP of Oracle's Cloud Developer Relations. I wanted to kind of jump in really quick. You talked a little bit about some of the managed solutions Oracle has out there today and some of the open source stuff that you're doing. I wanted to kind of jump in a little bit. What are some of the solutions you guys are providing, and what are the motivations behind some of those solutions?
Yeah. So I mentioned Kubernetes, and we have a container engine for Kubernetes, which is a certified, CNCF certified Kubernetes platform. Allows you to run Kubernetes applications in a managed service. We manage the control plane, all the masters for you, do all the upgrades and maintenance, et cetera, so you don't have to. Also, the data plane then are the worker nodes, which you can manage yourself, but there's also management and administration that's built on top of that too. So simplifies the management, the care and feeding, but also runs on top of this high performance bare metal infrastructure. It can run VMs, it can run GPUs, et cetera. So high performance there. That's kind of the foundation for our strategy. So container native strategy built on top of Kubernetes. Applications can be built on top of that for observability and monitoring. One of the most exciting things we're working on also, and you mentioned serverless, we have a project called FN, and last year we launched this project as an open source project. It's being run independently, fnproject.io, FN mean function, and FN is an open serverless environment. Community, a lot of community contributions happening. And really, this is the next big step for cloud computing standardization. Right now, AWS Lambda kind of is the standard bearer. They came first to market, but it's a proprietary solution, and it creates a lot of lock-in for folks who were using that to glue together pieces of the AWS infrastructure. When they find they want to back away from that, they're kind of tied to their cloud provider. Now, I kind of went through this as a startup CEO and co-founder. We end up getting tied into our cloud providers way too often. Once you start trying to get more and more performance and use all the non-standard APIs, you get locked in. So what we're looking to do is this next standardization built on top of Kubernetes containers needs to be around serverless and how serverless components can interact. CNCF is beginning to address this. Our contribution to this is the FN project. I welcome folks to get involved with that. We do a lot of sessions and training around it, FN project. Please, take a look at it, get involved. I think over this next 6 to 12 months, you'll see a lot of activity across the standards community around how to bring these components together. Because serverless is one of the more exciting elements that's bringing together, simplifying how you manage an environment and how you deploy and build an application. So you don't have to manage the servers anymore. And what's, I think, super exciting for me as a developer and the development community is that a serverless function can then reach out to the edge. So now we can start getting smaller microservice functions out on the edge, doing simple application running and bringing sensor data potentially back into the core. There's a lot of work going on in the CNCF and the Kubernetes world around Kubeflow and GraphPipe. These are components that are open sourced also that help you run machine learning applications at the core. So we're starting to see ML, AI applications at the core driven off container native, and serverless then being able to run things out on the edge in a very lightweight way, talking to Internet of Things, doing AR and VR technologies out on the edge, smart cars, retail, et cetera. So now we're starting to see all these things begin. That's kind of the dream. We have a cloud native source, which is basically democratizing how you develop applications. Anyone could do it. You work for a small application or something as big as huge Oracle applications too. And you can deploy scaled at the core, running ML and big data applications, or it can then be minimized and run out on the edge. So there's so much available right now. It's kind of breaking down walls, creating all this innovative and creative flow for developers. And I've been saying it's kind of the golden era from what I've seen. All these pieces we just talked about at the very beginning, the last 10 years, are starting to come together, and we're seeing it being deployed in a range of things. So I look forward to seeing where this goes, because the last 3 to 5 years I've seen massive growth. These things are moving off the laptop quickly into production at scale, and then moving out to the edge. So that's kind of what gets me as I'm talking to more and more developers out there or doing all this community work. This is kind of what gets them excited, and what can also we're trying to help grow as a community. So.
Right. Now, you touched on this a little bit. I think the concept of AWS Lambda or Azure Functions, Azure Logic Apps, that kind of thing. This kind of this aspect of serverless technology. It becomes kind of one of those things that becomes very lustery for organizations, because they say, hey, all I have to do is build these things, not have to manage anything. But from the FN project, how does this handle things like hybrid cloud, on-premise installations? What kinds of things? Are there any restrictions to this type of technology?
No, that's the beauty of the project itself, is that FN project, you can run on your laptop, very simply. You can run on-prem. It came out of the Iron.io team, which were the early serverless teams. That team came into Oracle and helped kind of take that technology to the next level. There's folks that run this locally. You can run this by yourself up in the cloud. Oracle is going to run a version of this as a functions as a service product, a Lambda-like function. You'll be hearing about that over the next probably few months. You can see that there's a way to deploy an FN app stack anywhere you want to. So definitely join in, start committing, and start playing with it, because there's a lot of stuff you can do with it. It's kind of easy to use. there are servers in the serverless world, except you just don't have to manage them. And to me, it's just another tool in the toolbox. It's not going to replace a lot of the container native application world, but there's some great use cases, ways that that unlock value, that you can combine the two worlds together from a container app technology. We're seeing a lot of people using Java and serverless together too. We have a huge conference coming up called Code One. It runs parallel to Oracle Open World, which is in October. A lot of focus around Java and microservices, and where serverless comes into that community too. So, so it's pretty cool to watch, some of these technologies that have been around a while moving into the mainstream, and then where serverless can help them, microservices can help them. All these things play with the existing technology base, along with the cool new toys that come out of the open source world too. So people are running Java in containers. They're running that on top of Kubernetes. We've got customers who are using WebLogic servers and classic app server infrastructures. They're running that as containers too, and in a container infrastructure, and using WebLogic clusters in a cluster management role on top of Kubernetes. So you have this interesting mix of legacy technologies, greenfield cloud technologies, and then this new move and improve world where we're all taking our existing apps and beginning to re-platform them into this new world to take advantage of the power at the core, these microservice agile architectures, and being able to then push some of that stuff out to the edge too. So lots of excitement again in all those areas, which makes it's just a greenfield opportunity for developers these days.
Right. I do want to, we're running close to low on time. I do want to bring my co-host back in, but right after we do, if they had some, after their questions, I do want to get a little bit into some of the open source topics if we have time. Kurt, you had some questions about containerization and some of the things that Oracle are doing as well.
Right. There are a couple of questions, especially a couple of things that have been said that I would love to dig into just a little bit. And one was on this question of vendor lock-in. Absolutely, it seems to me that having function as a service, on the one hand, the promise is that by making things much more atomic, it gives more freedom. But we also hear enterprises talking about the difficulty that comes with having incredibly complex architectures for their applications. Is this a case where on the one hand you have the promise of greater diversity, but on the other hand, the architecture itself almost drives towards lock-in just so the vendor has some semblance of sanity and simplicity in their life?
Yeah, and I think we've seen this in other. We saw it in the virtualization world, in the early cloud world. I think there's these, you get a set of technologies. If you want to deploy them in the early stage, there's, going to a single source platform helps you do that. Then you start seeing this democratization, this opening of the environment for open source technologies. You have industry organizations starting to step in where the vendor would have stepped in before. And you kind of saw that a little bit with Docker started off with their standardization of containers, and then they tried to bring in a new set of capabilities called Docker Swarm. At the same time, Kubernetes came in from the Google world, and that actually took hold from an open source and a community perspective, and that kind of steamrolled over an attempt to maybe be a little more proprietary in the Docker world. So I think what you started seeing is that there's attempts to bring things together. Some people use those early on, and then the next stage is that we get a more standard approach to it. And it kind of depends on where you want to, snapshot your technology, where you want to latch into it. I think what we've seen is that there's enough standardization around Kubernetes and the things that run on top of it, and enough tooling that has been brought together that you can start building applications and don't need to actually pick a specific vendor as your application platform. 3 to 5 years ago, that wasn't the case. But what we've seen is people who've made that choice 3 to 5 years ago with a product like, let's say, Pivotal or Red Hat OpenShift, maybe a more proprietary solution, are beginning to question whether they should pay that money our move to this more standard approach. And since we're coming fresh in this market right now, this is our chance to say, you can code this standard approach, you can use open source technologies, avoid that lock-in, and then you can begin to say, what are the cost-benefit analysis associated with that. And I say we've kind of gotten to the point where there's a tipping point around, maybe it's up and to the right, there's a tipping point towards a coalesced functional model. And these are models that have been run, in places like Netflix and places like Uber and Lyft and larger technology, web scale technology shops, Twitter. This is how they ran their shop over the last 7 to 10 years to get the scale they wanted. So now those architectures and those patterns have been more standardized, they've been communicated, and they're accessible by a broader community through these open source tools, through the training associated with that, through the managed services that make it easier to deploy. So it's a process. We're on a continuum here and an evolution. And I would say, the opportunities are opening up to go from proprietary to non-proprietary solutions. And then it becomes a trade-off on how you want to pick that as an enterprise itself and who your partners are and go from there. So.
Okay, well, that sounds very good. And one of the other things you talked about was being able to move these containers out to the edge. Mm-hmm. And so do you see this as a way of getting us closer to the fog computing architecture that people are talking about now as a replacement of cloud? I mean, are we heading in that direction with this kind of technology?
Well, I think it enables a lot more processing at the edge. That's for sure. We're getting to the point where if you have enough edge computing power and you can drop the right architecture out there, so you don't have to run a large application. It's just a function or a small serverless function. But it's connected. There's this connective tissue back to the core where you've got larger processing going on for making the bigger decisions. So how do I develop my rules? How do I take all the sensor data from all my edge devices, bring it back in, process it, and then send the rules back out there? So when I see something, I can react to it based upon the rule that's been processed at the core. So there's still going to be a lot of room for big data and ML processing at the core. You're going to need those big cores. Oracle Cloud was built over the last few years by guys who came out of AWS and Azure. Bare metal cloud, high performance, great for big data applications, for financial service applications, for biometric applications, for processing this large stuff. And so it's really cool to watch these HPC applications come in and how they can run and take advantage of the power at the core. But once you have made the decisions and you're ready and implement it, the execution needs to happen at the edge, and that can happen through these serverless apps. So I think there's a combination of value that happens. You need both, and if you have a common infrastructure or common framework, I think serverless provides a lot of that for the edge. Container and Kubernetes for a lot of the core cluster management, and then as we're bringing those two together through container technologies, I think that's where the potential happens. We're not there yet. I think that's the next 2 to 3 year kind of activity. But if I was starting a company right now, I'd be looking at something like that. That's for sure.
Fantastic. Now, before we close up, I did want to ask a couple things about open source, because you guys are doing a lot with open source. You're bringing in the community, or you're kind of expanding some of these things. First, what are some of the projects that actually are open source? And then how are you actually evangelizing these to the community? How are you getting the community involved to kind of commit back?
Yeah. So, part of my job, my team's role is to develop relations. So we actually build out the community and work with the folks actually out in meetups, out in local communities. So we actually go out and talk to everyone we can. You'll find us hopefully, and if you don't find us, come seek us out. We're talking at serverless meetups and container meetups, cloud meetups, across the world. The FN project is a great. They have a lot of content on the FN project. They have a Medium site, and a lot of evangelists who are out actually. We're out talking to all the serverless teams who are beginning to experiment, dabble, and begin to lock into different approaches that for standard interactions across serverless frameworks. The Cloud Event Standard, which is a recent way for the eventing between functions, needs to be standardized. That's one of the first things to do. We've done a lot of work around containers. We've got stuff published up on GitHub from projects called Smith and CrashCart, Railcar, Novartis. These are container management applications, right? That based upon we use containers internally. It's funny enough it should have been a surprise when I joined Oracle that there's so much interest internally. There's so many development teams, software development teams inside Oracle. They're all developing on top of Kubernetes. They're all developing on top of our container engine for Kubernetes. They're using Docker containers. They're using these frameworks itself. So, we get pushed internally by our own developers, and there's tens of thousands of developers inside Oracle pushing these new technologies. And they're using the same models and frameworks and patterns that are being used externally. So we have a lot of scale, a lot of expectations on our internal teams, but also what we're seeing externally. GraphPipe is a recent one that's come up too, and that's another one we shared out on GitHub, announced something on that about a month ago. GraphPipe is a way for machine learning API standardization to happen. We're seeing much more interest around machine learning, but there's a lot of componentry that hasn't been standardized yet. So GraphPipe is another Oracle project. Super cool, working how you standardize API and event communication between machine learning components. There's a lot of data moving between components that could be very big. It could be an issue around performance, around security, et cetera. So GraphPipe is another one that we just announced and are out working with the community. We publish all this stuff out there in terms of using our GitHub accounts. I do a lot of blogging and engagement around that too. So within different communities, we're involved heavily with Kubernetes, CNCF working groups, the serverless working groups, Cloud Events in particular, security within Kubernetes. We're platinum members and are engaged at as many different levels, the technical community as well as the sort of the outbound training community too. So it's important for us. And this is a new breed of folks that have come into Oracle. We do have a long history: Java, MySQL, SQL itself, Linux. We've had a lot of contributions that people don't really give Oracle credit for. But there's also this team that built the Oracle Cloud based up in Seattle. It's all AWS and Azure X's, and they've actually come in and built something that gives them a next generation cloud, building the cloud they've always wanted to build. Now you bring in a bunch of open source folks, startup teams that have expectations of how to build things based upon this componentry and these models. And we're the ones coming in now, bringing the developer community on top of this really cool enterprise-grade infrastructure. So, it's a new Oracle, it's a new approach, it's cloud native, high predictable performance on an enterprise-grade cloud, pretty cool stuff. So we're out there evangelizing and trying to get people on board and enjoying, getting out there. So,
fantastic. Well, unfortunately, we run out of time. Bob Quillen, VP of Oracle's Cloud Developer Relations. Bob, thanks so much for being here today. If someone wanted to get started, they wanted to get, there's lots of stuff going on at Oracle. Where could they go to find and kind of sift through it all and understand where they can get started?
Yeah, so our group has a microsite called cloudnative.oracle.com. So that's a good place to start. There's a variety of developer tools from there, developer.oracle.com. Another great place to start would be getting out to Code One, coming to the Oracle Code events that are going to be out in the different cities. Oracle Code One is next month in San Francisco, so come check us out there. Reach out to us on Twitter. I'm at Bob Quillen on Twitter, and join in. Check out the blogs. A lot of our team is actually talking a lot about these solutions on cloudnative.oracle.com. We've got tools that allow you to look at the FN project, ways to do Helm charts and monitoring Grafana, Prometheus, etc. and it's kind of where we localize a lot of the cloud native content. So definitely check it out. And it's something we're adding to every day. And I blog on it, and a lot of the DevRel team blogs on it too. So.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Scott, again, Bob, for being here, and thank you for being on This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, unfortunately, folks, we've run out of time. We've done it again. You've sat through another hour of the best dang enterprise podcast in the universe, according to 9 out of 10 containers. But I want to thank each and every person that makes this show possible, especially my co-hosts, with whom I would not want to do this show, starting with Miss Heather Williams, Senior Staff Product Solutions Architect at Rutgers Network. Thank you so much for being on the show again. Where can the folks find you and all of your work?
Well, I'm at Mo Better Wi-Fi on Twitter. I actually did just publish a blog. It's at the Ruckus blog site, the Ruckus Room, about my experience that I talked with you guys last month with the Mozilla Foundation and National Science Foundation Wireless Challenge. I think I mentioned next week I'm headed to North Carolina. If my shower abilities meet my last ITDRC deployment, you can expect to see me with shorter hair next time. After that, I spend a good deal of the next couple of weeks in San Diego for a couple of different conferences, the Ruckus Partner event and the CWNP's Wi-Fi Trek. So I will be there if anybody wants to meet up and have a beer.
Fantastic. Of course, we have to thank our very own Mr. Curtis Franklin. Curtis, where can they find you and all of the stuff that you're busy doing?
Well, as always, my writing is at Dark Reading, darkreading.com. I'll usually tweet in that direction at my Twitter account at KG4GWA. And next week, I'm going to be on site at Splunk's conference, .conf, which is taking place at the Swan and Dolphin Resorts down at Disney. So if you're coming into town for Splunk, look me up. And if you're not, well, watch what I'm doing on Twitter, and we'll try to tell you all about it.
Fantastic. We might just have to dedicate a show on all these conferences and some of the outcomes from that. We'll have to think about that for the coming show. Well, Curtis and Heather, thanks again for being here. Looking forward to seeing you guys again soon on some of the coming shows. Also, we have to thank you're the person who drops in each and every week, our loyal listeners. You come in to get your enterprise goodness from us, and we want to thank you and make it easier for you to watch the show each and every week. Just go right now, twit.tv/Twyat. There you will find all of the amazing back episodes that we have, all that great content about enterprise, but also the show notes, the co-host information, guest information, and the links to all the stories we cover. Plus, there are those magical links up there in the right-hand corner. They help you subscribe and download, whether it's the audio version or the video version, HD video version, and it lets you listen or watch on the device of your choice. It's the best way to stay on top of your enterprise and IT news. Now, after you subscribe, share with all of your friends and family and coworkers. We love doing the show, and without your support, we can't keep doing it. So definitely share it with your friends and family. Now, after you subscribe, also remember we do this show live each and every week, 1:30 Pacific on live.twit.tv. And if you're going to come to the show live, you might as well jump into the chat room as well. We have a great chat room, and each and every week we get some good content from them. So that's irc.twit.tv. Now, don't forget to follow me at twitter.com/LouMM. You'll get to see all of my things that I do in my normal daily work job, at Microsoft. And we do, dev.office.com is where you want to go to find all the information, as well as check out all the content that came out of Ignite from this particular week. There's some great stuff, especially about Office. And we just announced our Excel custom functions using JavaScript. So check that out. I also want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially thank you to Leo and Lisa. They continue to support us each and every week to do This Week in Enterprise Tech. I also want to thank all the engineers at Twit, as well as Mr. Brian Chi, our tireless producer who gets the content for the show and the guests for the show. So thank you to him. And of course, thank you. Before we sign out, we have to thank our TD for today, Kevin. Thanks for coming back, sir. You know what? Let's keep the tradition of the show. What was the actual content of the show? What's the main topic of the show?
It was about the shark fin. I like sharks, so that's the fin. Get it?
Close. I'm afraid what I was looking for is FM serverless, but thank you for trying. Maybe next time you will get it. And until next time, I'm Louis Maresca saying, if you just want to know what's going on in the Enterprise, just keep quiet.